So it's one of those real life stories where you hear, Cy will say, support it, don't debate it. If a company asks for your opinion, please provide it. But once they make that decision, you're on the payroll to support that decision and make it a good one.
Hey there, friend. This is Stephanie Crevens, and you are listening to the Mid-Level Leaders Hot Mess Hotline, where we bring you hard lessons and hard truths by some seasoned executives and C-suiters from around the country so that you don't have to learn the hard way. This podcast is for ambitious learners who want to know what does it take to get to the next level and the next level and the next level. These are the lessons that we bring you through the Hot Mess Hotline. Today's guest is Joe Topinka. He is a visionary chief information officer and has parlayed his career into becoming a mentor, an author, a speaker, and a coach after 35 years of success. His career ranges in experience in so many different industries: packaged software, brokerage, financial services, manufacturing, retail. He has seen success across multiple industries, and he is amazing at creating agile, business-minded IT functions that are viewed as valuable assets to the executive teams through a variety of business cycles. So to sum all that up, Joe is awesome. Joe is awesome. Joe is awesome. For my IT friends out there, he has a book called The IT Business Partnerships, a Field Guide. Get it wherever books are sold. Get your hands on it. Learn from Joe's lessons. My friend, Joe's and I's conversation, I was just so struck by his grace, his compassion, his empathy, and his willingness to be vulnerable, not only with his teammates, but with each of you who are listening in. There are some amazing lessons in this conversation. So I'm going to stop yakking and let's dig into it. Let's hear from Joe. Here we go. All right, Joe, my new friend, tell us about your hot mess.
Hey, Steph, it's so good to be on the podcast. I have so many to choose from.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites that I have shared with people is it goes back when I first was recruited into a role in Charlotte, North Carolina. I took a chief information officer role there, and I was hired by one of the founders of this high-tech company. Really excited to get there. My wife and I moved 1,000 miles away from Minneapolis, St. Paul, to Charlotte, which, given it's been like below zero, seems like a really good idea.
Yes.
Especially today. But so I joined the company about 2 months into my tenure there. The company, which was owned by private equity, decided that they needed a new CEO. So the person who hired me, who I sort of banked my shift in careers on, was no longer my boss 2 months in. So I was pretty freaked out. I had a new boss, turned out to be a great guy, but he was brought in by the private equity group, and he started to make changes pretty immediately. Several months into his tenure, so I'm now less than 6 months in, I remember him calling me. He lived in Atlanta. And he called me and said, "Joe, I've got some news for you." And he did this from his car. And he said, "Hey, I'm revamping the executive team, and you're no longer on it. And some of your colleagues are no longer on it. I'm shrinking my footprint." And I remember thinking to myself, this is the hot mess part, how disappointed I was and how wrong that was. I'm a chief information officer. I need to report to the CEO. Doesn't he know this? And I had some great coaching and mentoring from Cy Wakeman. And I remembered what she said. She said, "Support it, don't debate it." So for some reason, that notion popped into my head, and I caught myself before my fight or flight reflex took over. And I basically said to him, "Look, you're the CEO. I trust your decision, and let me know what I can do to make that the most successful decision possible." And after doing that, I actually felt some relief, but I was still just personally disappointed because, I always had identified with being on the executive team, and not being there kind of felt like a gut punch, and was surprised by my reaction. When I said what I said and did what I did, it actually felt okay. I kept breathing, and the sun.
Yes.
It was amazing. Uh, what was interesting stuff about this is not only was my reaction a surprise to myself, it was also a surprise to the CEO. He had made that same call to other execs, and the calls didn't go as well. And he remarked to me how mature I was and how supportive I was. And he indicated that he wanted more of that sort of leadership on the team.
Wonderful.
And long story short, down the road, he brought me back onto the executive team, which is where I stayed until I retired a number of years later. So it's one of those real life stories where you hear, Cy will say, support it, don't debate it. If a company asks for your opinion, please provide it. But once they make that decision, you're on the payroll to support that decision and make it a good one. And for some reason, that idea just popped right into my head. And it was really pretty groundbreaking for me and set sort of a nice tone around the company, because people would when this sort of thing happens, people who know you, circle the wagons. They want to rescue you and they want to tell you, hey, really sorry about that. What an unfortunate thing. They shouldn't really do that to you. And trying to pull me into the drama triangle.
Yes, make you a victim. Yes.
Yeah. And it's really tempting to go in there with them because it feels good in the moment. But I actually resisted the urge to do it. And what I was surprised by is how people started to think of me differently too. They thought of me as a real leader, someone who was a team player, which I'd always considered myself to be in the past. But it's easy to be when you're sitting at the executive team and everything's going well. As soon as you have a little adversity, that really tests whether or not you really are.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So many great lessons. And so first of all, for my friends listening in, when Joe told me that he was mentored and coached by Cy Wakeman, I got so excited. I threw my pencil in the air. For anyone who has been in my network for the past 2 years, you have heard me quote Cy Wakeman. She has such genius to share with us when there is adversity, when there are tough things. And so for him to put into practice one of her very practical tools, because that is all she is full of, is practical, real, emotional, intelligent tools. And it changed the trajectory of his career. It changed the access to power that he had in the future. So that was just a little side story. I didn't want anyone to think I was super cool, because when I knew that he knew Cy, I was like, oh my God, total fangirl. She is amazing and she's a genius. And I'm really jealous that you got coached by her. But
yeah. She is a good friend. I talk to her pretty regularly now, and she is an amazing person. She's just the same way off stage as she is on stage. She's just as authentic and just as real and just as compassionate, and a real friend. So I've been very, very fortunate to have gotten to know her. It's been probably close to 15 years now that I've known her. I saw her I saw her do a keynote. I had done a keynote speech at a conference for technology leaders, and the organizers suggested I stay and watch her. And I thought, oh, gee, that's what I need to do, is sit and listen to another motivational speaker. Kind of rolled my eyes, but I stuck around for some reason. And I remember sitting in my chair just blown away by how pragmatic and how, she just spoke the truth and really resonated with me. And that's where my long love affair with reality-based leadership started.
Yes. I love that. Well, you did a great job outlining kind of that whole experience and what went down in a, relatively short amount of time, about 6-8 months in total. I'm curious, and I asked this question because I know a lot of my listeners, they have PE companies coming in and buying their companies and consolidating and merging them. What were your assumptions about what was going to happen when that new CEO came in to your organization?
Well, when I learned of the news, the guy who hired me was gone, and the new guy was coming in, I thought, well, this I'm going to have to start looking for a job, because invariably new leaders like to bring their own team in.
That's right.
That was my initial reaction, and I had to fight that notion too, because the reality I was dealt with is I was still there. I was still getting a paycheck. I mean, I still had a lot of work to do. And the company needed my services. So I just dug in and tried to, look beyond the the anxiousness and the uncertainty of it all, and just tried to do the best I could.
Oh, I love that. I love that foresight and that, everyone has that fear track that jumps in when uncertainty comes in and it tells you a variety of things. It's usually a version of you're going to get fired and your life is over as you know it. And, and
Exactly.
our lizard brain, it does funny things to us. But you were, I would say, mature enough and had enough foresight to say, you know what? It's really about the company's mission. Let me see what I can do here in the short term, regardless of the CEO situation.
Yeah, and I would say if that had happened to me 10 or 15 years earlier, I would not have had the same reaction. I think time and experience gave me a level of maturity that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And
Mhm.
one of the things that you do as you get older is you start to realize that you're not going to change the outcome. So you might as well just saddle up and do the best you can in a
Yes.
situation. And one of the things I've learned over the years is when you're faced with challenges like that, you think about, well, what could happen, and you start to develop a narrative around, well, if A or B or C happen, here's how I'll respond. And so it's building resilience. So no matter what happens, you've got a game plan, and you feel prepared. And that's what actually happened there. Is I actually thought about, well, worst case scenario is he says, you're out, and I'm bringing my own person in. And then guess what? I'm back in the market. I'm sure they'd figure out a way to give me a nice soft landing, hopefully. But if
Mhm.
not, I'll survive. And I realized, just take a breath and do the best you can. And the universe will take you where it needs to go.
Absolutely, it will. That's fantastic. And so then taking us to that moment where the CEO called you and intuitively your body just responded and you supported it, you didn't debate it. Why did you surprise yourself?
Oh, because of how I felt when he told me the news. It was probably good that it was over the phone, because I'm sure my body language gave away the shock that I was feeling, and the sadness and the disappointment that I was feeling in the moment. But I had enough, wherewithal to sort of gather myself and just say, look, he's made this decision. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to live this. I thought, well, I'm going to do what Sai says. I'm going to support it, not debate it, with myself or with anyone else. I remember saying that to myself in that moment, in that split second before I opened my mouth. It's funny how fast your brain can work when you let it. If
Yes.
you let it, if you let it. And that doesn't always work that way for me. Sometimes, emotions get the best of you because, we are human after all.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think there's wisdom in when there's tough news to be delivered. And in your case, you were a beneficiary of it, delivering it over the phone. I call it old school. Like, I think there's benefit in there because we can offer each other a bit more grace because our body language gets taken out of it and we can pause on the phone and truly respond without getting caught up in all the other layers of it. I think there is good wisdom in creating that grace by using the phone. I don't know. Would you agree, disagree?
Yeah, in this case, I definitely think so. I would never have thought that. This is the kind of news you want to deliver. As impersonally as this. But
Right.
now that you mention it, he didn't have to watch my body language. Probably had a big red face because blood had just rushed there, and I was able
Yeah.
to, at least in my own mind, sound composed. And I gave myself a minute. You can actually put yourself on mute and breathe for a second, and then come back. I
Yes.
did all that, and for me it worked. At least in that instance, it did.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I use that same tactic. If I have tough news, I'll just call them because it creates some air, some breathing space for people.
Yeah,
I think and personally, we've over indexed on video calling since Zoom. It's way too much. I'll take an old school conference call any day of the week, but that's me.
yeah, I'm with you. I do a fair amount of coaching and mentoring now, as part of my current profession, and I've noticed this trend, especially the last 4 or 5 months, where people are, I think, encouraged to turn off their video if they want to. And
Hmm.
so get half the people with it on or off, or they'll turn it on and then turn it off midway through. And I think people are just sort of tired of being on camera all day long.
Yeah.
It's interesting dynamic for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a sign of the times for sure. I mean, there's, Zoom fatigue is real, and there's a point where video calling for connection is very important, but something about March 2020 and it was everybody jump on the video call all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
I would like to
Yeah,
call you from the car. That's what I would like to do.
exactly. Right. Video. Come on.
I know, right?
Oh, it's a great social experiment. I think, and I think you're seeing cracks in the armor too. I think people are pretty stressed out. I see people, struggling. The Great Resignation. People are leaving their companies in droves, the biggest numbers we've seen in history for many reasons. I think that maybe it just revealed, some core issues or challenges that may have been there all along, but with COVID, it sort of pushed people right over the edge. I think SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, has been writing and talking a lot about, EAP programs in companies are just off the charts with, employees calling in asking for help. So interesting times for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And what an opportunity to learn even more resilience.
Yeah,
I can't speak to everybody's individual situation, but oftentimes what I know to be true is that there's oftentimes way more possibility at your current place than resignation being needed. But we don't equip ourselves to communicate our needs, ask for our needs, and then make a game plan based on whether or not the company can meet those needs. So it's a really tricky situation. And again, I'm not trying to speak for every situation, but by and large, when I'm doing coaching, people don't know how to articulate their needs. And then they get mad at their company because the company's not meeting their needs that they don't even know they have.
yeah,
It's a tough situation.
yeah. It reminds me of something I learned along the way too that has helped me as a coach and a leader, and that is this idea of self-reflection, and
Yes.
really understanding, self-awareness, and are you who you think you are? I remember years ago I was leading a team. I was working for a division of the bank in New York, and I had received a phone call from one of my employees, and I had another employee in the room, and I took the phone call, which you're not supposed to do, but I did. And that employee on the phone told me that you're really a strong leader, really like that. And I hung up from the call, and the person in the room was like the truth teller of all truth tellers. And I asked her, I said, so yeah, Bob just said I'm a great leader. What do you think? She said, well, you could be, but you don't really give us the kind of feedback, that you really need to. And if you want to be a great leader, then you got to do that. And that was the first time in my life someone, who reported to me was as brutally honest as she was. I speak to her now and then, and I remind her of that moment, which she remembers quite well. But sometimes you have rose-colored glasses on, and that taught me to be a little bit more realistic about my own performance.
Absolutely. Oh gosh, absolutely. Love that. All right. Well, we digressed for a minute, took on some current challenges. Let's go back to that year. You supported it, you didn't debate it. And friends, I keep repeating those words because it is such an amazing tool, especially for pro troublemakers. So people in my network, like we are born to challenge. We're born to push back, but we have to know our place for that. We have to understand the limits of that. When we're asked for feedback, when the feedback is when the feedback is needed and necessary. But here in Joe's situation, the decision had been made. And so he put himself into a new path, if you will, because he heard in the CEO's voice, this decision is made. This is done. I can either get on the bus and keep on trucking along, or I can debate it and put myself in a combative position with someone that I don't really quite know that well. Does that sound
Yeah,
fair?
it does sound it's spot on. I think it's well summarized, and I think the idea that you can actually influence your own response. You hear that if you go to any leadership training program, they'll tell you about how you can actually control your own responses. And I think when you first do it like I did, you realize you can actually control your own response, and it actually is liberating in a lot of ways.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so that it did change the dynamics for me, and enhanced my career at the same time, and changed the way that people viewed me as a leader. I didn't succumb to the rescuing that people were trying to do. And that there's a lot of capital that you earn inside a company when you do that.
Absolutely. So, friends, if you're not familiar with the drama triangle, trust me when I say it's being played out in your life, especially in the workplace, every single day until we know better. And so the drama triangle is you always have a protector, you have a villain, and you have a victim. And so those three roles will play off of each other as long as people subconsciously and consciously agree to participate. And so my guess is folks went to Joe, you poor thing. I can't believe that happened to you. So they're putting themselves in somewhat of the protector role and putting Joe in the victim mode. And when you're a victim, you're powerless. And Joe refused to accept his powerlessness. And they tried to make the new CEO the villain. And Joe refused to put the CEO in that villain position because the CEO wasn't a villain. He was trying to make the best decisions with the information that he had. And I would argue closing up your leadership circle, making that tighter is oftentimes a very good decision. I can't speak for that CEO, but oftentimes leadership teams in the spirit of consensus get way too big. Now, I'm on Joe's side. I'm going to argue that CIO should be at that leadership table, which he got on later, but he refused to step into that role. And instead, what we want to invite all of our coworkers into is the empowerment triangle. So you have a creator, you have a challenger, which is still allowed to push back at appropriate moments. And then you have the coach. The person is more of a neutral observer. They ask the powerful questions to bring out the best in the team. But you see how those three roles are completely different than a villain, a protector, and a victim. And that's what our organizations need more of. And that's what Joe invited everyone into, because the moment he said, yo, CEO man, I don't hope you didn't call him that. I hope you called him by his name. Yo, CEO man, like, I support you. Like, this is where you need to go. And I'm going to be on board with you. You were able to take the CEO out of the villain's role and put him into something more empowering for the organization because he didn't have to be defensive.
He talked to me about that moment numerous times throughout the rest of my career there. He always would bring me back to that. Like he still was like surprised and shocked by my response because it was so different than what he gets from most executives when those sorts of things are getting announced.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Oftentimes I'm sure he gets either silence, which we want to think is agreement, or he gets the combativeness. And
it's funny. It reminds me that, so I had a few people come to me outside of my organization and ask me about that whole scenario. And they knew that I was a big supporter of, sort of leadership principles and ideas. And that I had this set of rules of engagement that I created with my team. And the beginning of every team meeting, I put the 10 rules up on a screen, and I would require everyone to just volunteer examples of where the rules were well leveraged or when they weren't, as kind of a way to reinforce them. So they weren't just a poster on the wall. And we did that. Some of them were coming from reality-based leadership. Some were our own. One that I love a lot is assuming positive intent. And as an IT professional, that we talk about APIs.
Yes.
My API is assume positive intent. That's the human API. The supported don't debate it was definitely one of them. Facts before stories was another one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We create our own drama with our own made up facts sometimes. And I love stop judging, start helping. That's kind of one of her Sai's core principles. And the clear connection to that one is if you're judging when you're in your BMW, bitching, moaning, and whining.
Yes. Yes. So good. Well, I'll tell you what, Joe, do you mind? Let's take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and let's dig into one. I'd love to hear more about the rules of engagement, but let's dig into how else did you use that experience to build your career, build those around you, learn from it to be as successful as you are today. Good?
Sounds great.
Thank you. While we're taking a break from this episode's hot mess, I want to talk about one of the hot messes that I know you have, and that's your meetings. Friends, one of the biggest complaints that we have in our businesses is either about the amount of meetings, how long they are, how worthless they are. And my perspective is that your meetings are your most expensive use of your team's time. That means they also need to be the most valuable use of your team's time. And instead, right now, too many of your meetings are spent with just status updates where they could have been an email, or the mansplainer that talks and says that talks a lot but doesn't say anything, or the person who shows up and says, "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't get this done. I'm sorry I didn't get this done." So then why are you meeting? So instead of leaving your next meeting feeling deflated like Eeyore, I want you to feel like Bruce Lee and kick in some major ass. So that's why I've created this tool for you. It's called Lead Kick-Ass Meetings, and you can get it at stephaniecrevens.com/lead kick-ass meetings. Get it? And it is full of templates, agendas, and icebreakers that you can use. Just copy and paste, plug and play, so that your meetings become an investable use of time for you and your team and your company. I chose these 3 areas for your meeting specifically because they're usually the tools that are most likely to go off the rails for any leader, and you need something that's plug and play. You know, most folks complain that an icebreaker is too cheesy. I've got icebreakers for you that are worthwhile and create connection. Most folks complain that an agenda either doesn't exist or it's so vague you have no idea what you're talking about. I've got agendas for you that are useful from the get-go. And I've got some templates and tools and processes that you can use. Again, just send it out to your team to make the meeting as valuable as possible. All right, my friend, that's what I have for you. I want your next meeting to be worth $1 million, right? It's costing your company a lot of time and money. It's costing you a lot of frustration. Lead kick-ass meetings. Go over to the landing page. It's just stephaniecrevens.com/lead kick-ass meetings. Put in your email. You'll get that tool delivered right to your inbox, and you're going to be a meeting hero as soon as you put those into practice. All right, now let's get back to this episode's hot mess. So, Joe, how long ago was that scenario?
That was probably 2015.
Okay. All right. So good. We're recording this January 2022. So we're approaching 6-7 years on that. A lot of opportunities to implement what you've learned since then. We talked about the rules of engagement. And I want to come back to that one in a minute because I think that's so powerful to use with our team. That's setting expectations for how we'll interact. But any other top ideas come to mind about how you've remembered that situation and used it for your benefit or others' benefit since then?
Well, I've actually talked about that exact scenario with my teams, especially in one-on-one coaching when people are not responding well to decisions the company's making. And, when you make it personal and you can demonstrate that, you survived and thrived through that whole cycle, everyone else can do it too. You can just kind of pave the way. And so I've used it on a number of occasions. Actually, I've talked about this once before in a public forum. I did it on Si's No Ego podcast a couple of years ago.
Nice.
So it definitely, when you practice what you preach, it gives the whole concepts a lot more credibility. I know from my own experience that a lot of what I have incorporated into my coaching program comes from my own personal experience as a professional working in a professional environment. Just learning, how to deal with every nuance and situation that comes your way. It's nice to have pragmatic tools you can use. And so that's just one way that I've actually tried to take that particular situation, turn it into something positive.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Have you had the great experience of other people using that tool on you?
Yeah, actually, not only at work, but also here at home. When they're, if I, am not living my own truth at home, for example, my wife is very quick to help me remind myself that I need to assume positive intent.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had people, turn it around on me when I've, sort of forgotten about it. That's the one thing about this too, is even though I do coaching and mentoring, we're all humans and we forget that we are sometimes. And you do get caught up in the day and your ego will pull you right into
Oh,
crazy
yes. Whew.
discussion. Never. So I've had, and it's really strong leaders that I found who are willing to do that. The other thing, Steph, I tell you is your leadership style, for me, it when the leader gives you permission to be that way, you have a much stronger team. So I
Mm,
make it safe. I try to make it safe for my team members to come to me with whatever issues, challenges, including if it's me that they're having a problem with. And I've had good success with that. And I think that sort of mindset and living the rules of engagement have resulted in the teams that I've managed since I started doing that. I've always had the top ranked teams from an engagement standpoint as a result. And really, what you're doing is you're teaching people how to be resilient and how to be, to succeed despite your circumstances. No matter
yes.
what comes at you, you've got the wherewithal to find a way to succeed no matter what.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Guys, or for all my listeners out there, another great CIO Aikmanism is the reason we can't, or our circumstances aren't the reason that we can't succeed. They are the reason that we must succeed. That got me through the pandemic. I'm not going to lie. It got me through the pandemic. And I shared it with everyone who would listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I know, Cy has lived through many different, life experiences and where she's had to use these very same principles.
Yeah.
So she's just like us.
Walks the talk. I love it.
Yeah, another
Yeah.
human being with real problems and issues.
Yeah. Well, so for our leaders listening in, the hope of the podcast is that folks don't have to wait to mature. They don't have to wait to go through hard stuff to learn hard lessons. That's why we give folks the space here to share their hard lessons so that other people can pick up those hard truths. And from your perspective, what are the must-have rules of engagement? And then for the leader listening in, what are other ways to think about how to create rules of engagement, maybe with their team to customize them a little bit?
I have 5 that I go to pretty religiously. And
Okay.
the first is stop judging, start helping.
Mhm.
If you're judging, you're not leading. Leaders don't judge. If they see a problem, you go seek it out and you try to help. That's what leaders do. And I try not to bitch, moan, or whine or complain because that's just another form of judging. So that's size. Get out of your BMW. No bitching, moaning, or whining. I think assuming positive intent. There's a third one that as a go-to for me.
Mm-hmm.
Reorienting yourself, giving yourself permission to go into every scenario with a positive assumption about why that person invited you to have a conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
Just give yourself permission to do that.
I heard a slightly different version of this the other day from Bob Goff. He's kind of a leadership guru as well, but he says, what's the least creepy version of what's going on with that person? And I was like, I love that.
Yeah, I love it. That's a real way to say it. Yeah.
Because what do we do? I mean, we make up worst case scenario in our head, and it's oftentimes their intent doesn't match at all how we interpreted it. And it's not creepy. They're just.
It kind of gives you an insight into someone's sort of frame of mind or their emotional well-being when they are quick to judge and quick to assume the worst.
Yes.
And it's our job as leaders to help pull them out of that quagmire that they're in. I'd say a fourth rule that I really love is facts before stories. Mm-hmm. We are amazing writers. Sometimes we write our own scripts where we play the starring role as the victim in the movie that's playing in our mind.
That's right.
And there's a choice you can make, and you can say to yourself, "Hey, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to actually go get the real facts and assume positive intent along the way, and see if I can't get to the bottom of whatever the particular issue is." And then the support it, don't debate it item that I mentioned at the very outset, that was my hot mess. Those are my favorite go-tos.
And then how would you think about helping other leaders design the questions to craft other rules of engagement that really work for them and their team?
I always like to bring teams together. Oftentimes I'll use some icebreaker technique. I'll do Gallup strengths finders, and we'll line people up by strengths, and that sort of thing, just as a way to kind of get people together. And then I'll share my favorite rules of engagement, and then I'll invite them to help create more, just like which ones really work for us as a team. Because one of the other rules that I've used in the past is bring a brick, not a cathedral. That's from the improv team at Second City in Chicago.
Oh.
Yeah, I went to a leadership training program, and they talked about if you're going to go design a solution and bring it, do the big reveal, you're not going to get that much buy-in. But if you bring a few bricks and you want to build a cathedral, you'll get other people that will help carry some bricks and stack them up.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah. So that came out of that brainstorming that I did with one of the teams that I had, and that's made it on my list of possible rules of engagement for teams. And I give people probably 15 or 20 different examples. I always keep these 5 core that I already talked about, but there's a bunch more that you can use. A lot of them tend to be around listening skills and respecting, and not bringing your laptop or your phone to a conversation, and staying off of it while you're in a meeting. Those are things that I do believe are important. Those are the kinds of things that teams will often come up with to shape their own rules of engagement.
Yeah.
I would tell you, Steph, the way that I found that worked most successfully for me is to get teams to really buy in and believe in these rules is to talk about them every team meeting. Spend 10 or 15 minutes out of an hour, because to me, it was that important. And you end up in the beginning, you'll have lots of crickets because people aren't going to be willing to speak up or share a problem, even if, hey, I didn't really do this very well. And as we get to know each other and we start to trust one another, you build that trust, people will be more than happy to share their foibles or their issues or challenges. And it's a lot more constructive. And I actually had a team see the performance of my group and ask me to come to their group and talk about the rules of engagement. They wanted to instantly add water, stir, and have the rules work. And, it doesn't work that way.
Not at all. Not at all. Yes. It's something about us as humans. We need to revisit the same message and decision multiple times before we get it and put it into practice. I wish we were different, but we are not. That is how we roll.
One of the fun things I've done too, and I could talk about this for a long time, but ask your teams to take the rules and evangelize them in not only inside your organization, but outside. So I've had leaders that work for me share the rules and talk about the importance of the rules outside of the companies we work for. Nice. Just as a way to kind of reinforce and as leaders, we're oftentimes teachers, and we share information, and we kind of pave a path. And that's one way that I've done that.
Fantastic. So we've had an amazing conversation. I'm like so geeked up now about rules of engagement. As we wrap up everything that we've talked about, 2 last questions for you. One is thinking back to your time as a CIO, as being in that C-suite, being a top leader. What do you want those mid-level leaders, from manager to director, to know about what it takes to be in your shoes at that level?
I would say it's a great question, by the way. I think know yourself, really be critical and do the work to self-reflect.
Yes.
Even get your own personal board of directors and ask people who are willing to give you feedback to give you feedback.
Yes.
Be willing to listen for it, because there's always elements of truth in what people are telling you. That's a big lesson learned. And I think if you set your mind to it, there's not much you can't do. I've heard that. We've all heard it for forever. But, my own experience is it's true.
Yes.
You just have to commit yourself to it.
Yeah.
And self-reflection is a big part of it for me. And that's what really kind of changed my trajectory as a leader when I started to really evaluate how I was really performing, with truth tellers on my team helping me along the way. I think it really changed everything for me.
Yes, I agree completely. I think a lot of folks who do engage in either self-help or some kind of personal professional development, there's different camps, but a lot of folks think, oh, if I just take new actions, then I'll be good. And I'm a firm believer that it's actions, tools, and mindsets. And we heard that in your story. You engaged in coaching to change your mindset. And so when the moment arose, you could use your tool of support it, don't debate it. And then because you had worked so hard on that internal dialogue, you could actually take the action and make it happen. And it's those three layered together that are unbelievably powerful. It's not just the action itself, or not just the tool itself, or not just the mindset, because you could have had the mindset and your real thoughts could have betrayed you and shot out of your mouth, and that would have changed the future of your career.
I wouldn't have been on your podcast.
Or maybe as a what not to do story.
Exactly. Don't act like that idiot.
Here's what not to do by Joe Topinka.
I love it. That's great, because I it becomes reflexive then, and sometimes you need that. So when you're in the moment, if you practice it enough, your reflexes will kick in.
That's right. They will. All right. Last question, and I'll let you get back to your glorious day here. But for those ambitious leaders that one day do want to, be in the C-suite, they want to go from manager and be all the way up. What can they start doing today to advance their career and meet their goals?
One of the things that I've had the most success with is networking and finding leaders in your local market, or even online these days.
Yes.
And seek out leaders that you want to emulate, and you'd be surprised. You can reach out to Sai. You can reach out to now maybe Sai won't respond, but she might. She did to me years ago. Just don't be afraid to get out there and network and then practice the craft. Get on panels at a conference and talk about this stuff. Become a teacher. That's what I've done.
Absolutely. Wonderful. My gosh, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and sharing your time and your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Steph, thanks for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure. The time went by like in a nanosecond. So I appreciate you having me on.
I love it. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
My goodness, friend, did we give you enough leadership resources during this conversation? I mean, you learned from Joe Topinka. You learned from Cy Wakeman. You learned from Bob Goff. He's a hilarious person, by the way. Look him up if you don't know Bob Goff. He's got some amazing words of wisdom. He's more of the Christian variety of leadership. If that's your jam, if it's not your jam, he still has some good takeaways. I have so many notes from my conversation with Joe. I want to provide for you kind of the highlight, if you will, the 20% of the content that for me is going to stick out and have 80% of the impact here. Joe admitted to us, and I hope that you're willing to admit this to yourself too, that he heard the fear coming in when that new CEO took over, right? He heard the scripts. He heard oh my gosh, the world is falling down around me. How am I ever going to survive? And he knew enough to know at that point in his life that that's not real, and that he could persevere and he could build resilience regardless of what that company or the universe brought to him. And it paid off in spades for him, because he didn't listen to that fear that cropped up in his brain. He's like, I know that's not real. I'm going to keep going instead and see what happens. I love that. This top lesson that he learned from Sai and that you can learn as well. She has some amazing lessons in her books. By the way, Cy Wakeman, I'll put the link in the comments. I know we were like fangirling all over her. She really has amazing grace and wisdom that I believe we can all learn from. But the top lesson from this podcast conversation is support it, don't debate it. As a pro troublemaker, you need to use your intuition to know the difference between now is the time to challenge and push back. Now is the time to support it, don't debate it. There is a difference. And I would argue that only in the moment can you truly know what is the best option for you. And Joe used that discernment in that moment to become viewed as a real team player, to become viewed as someone who has the ability to respond to situations in a mature way to deserve to be in that boardroom with the CEO. And, as Joe and I, we kind of digressed, right now with COVID, a lot of social experiments are going down, right? With the use of technology, how they can hinder, how they can help teamwork and connection, either team connection or personal connection. Keep yourself open and flexible as we continue to move through COVID. We're recording this January 2022. Omicron is rearing its ugly head. We don't know what the future of vaccine is going to be. stay flexible, stay learning the lessons that this time in our life is asking us to learn. That's how we build resilience. You know, one of the things that Joe said too is, as a leader, it was my job to make it safe to bring whatever you needed to talk about to me, which I think is a beautiful lesson. Make your office, virtual or otherwise, a safe place for people to bring their concerns. And don't engage in the drama triangle. Don't engage in your employees' willingness to be a victim or a villain or a protector. Encourage them to step into that empowerment cycle instead. You have the power to do that with the power of your words in that moment. Use coaching, use questions to move people to a more productive and helpful place. When Joe said, stop judging, start helping, leaders don't judge, that just struck me. I mean, I work with a lot of leaders who judge a lot of things by their people, and it creates a real barrier in their relationship and actually in that employee's progress. And so when Joe said leaders don't judge, I couldn't agree more, my friend. Make sure you're dropping your assessment, your definition of your employees, and truly see them for who they are so that you can help them get to the next level, whatever the next level is. And everyone pops up to the next level at very different speeds, depending on so many different factors for that person. Be the guide to support them along the way. Don't judge them in the process. Lord knows the world needs a lot less judgment, especially right now. If you hadn't heard this before, it's quite a funny take on what happens at our organizations, but get out of your BMW. No bitching, moaning, or whining, right? It does nothing but reinforce a lack of problem solving. It shuts down critical thinking, and it disconnects us from other human beings who we need their help to problem solve and be critical thinkers and make our organizations and our teams and our people successful. So friend, so many nuggets in that conversation. I just have a whole page of notes. I want to hear what yours are. Wherever you're listening or watching in, leave us a comment. What's your top takeaway from my conversation with Joe? And then also, if you got value from this podcast, do me a favor, share it with another leader like you that maybe needs to hear these lessons too. By doing that, you help us get more of these hard lessons out into the world and bring even more value to my fellow pro troublemakers. All right, my friend, here's my invitation to you. Let's go back out into the world. Let's be that pro troublemaker, that positive change agent that people actually want to work with. And let's get the real work done. And I'll see you next time, my friend.